Lexi, and I'm going to be talking about what I've learned so far this semester. One thing that I learned that I particularly enjoyed was talking about the having and being in daily experience. And within this, what particularly stood out to me was the reading section of it, because it talked about sort of reading in like the being mode of existence and the having mode of existence, and how in the being mode, reading is sort of like having a conversation with the author, which I thought was really cool. Um, I talked about how when you're reading a book that's not very deep or profound, it sort of is like you're only reading it for the plot. You're just trying to like inhale it. Like, I think it compared it to like watching TV or eating chips. It's not like you're thinking about it. You're just trying to see what happens next. Like, does the hero win? Does the hero lose? What happens at the end? And then when you get to the end, you're done. But you haven't really learned anything about the author or about yourself, really. But then in the being mode of existence, when you're reading it, you're trying to like see the deeper meanings and learn about the author and also about yourself, which I thought was really interesting. And it also talked about how like with schools and like history books, how we're sort of taught to just sort of have the knowledge and like have as much, I think it said like intellectual property as we can, um, versus like understanding like all of the like the goods and the bads and like the deeper meanings behind all of like the things that we're reading, sort of like with the being. And so this all particularly stood out to me because I really like to read, obviously. And I could sort of like see like the difference between when I read like a really deep and like thought provoking book versus like sort of a generic book that doesn't really make me think, and how by like thinking about like the being versus having mode while I'm like reading these, I can sort of connect more and see more of what the author's saying. And so, one main example of this is I really like Sylvia Plath. She's an author and a poet from like many, many years ago. She's dead now, but um, and reading her novel, The Bell Jar, it's sort of like if you're reading it in just the having mode of existence, um, you're just seeing like, okay, there's this girl who moved to New York and now she's trying to get a job and she's going to school. Like, what's going to happen to her next? Like, is she going to be okay? Is she going to make it? But then if you're reading it in sort of the being mode of existence and trying to focus on like deeper meanings, you can see like what Sylvia Plath is like thinking and feeling as she's writing it. And it's actually like very profound and like thought provoking if you actually look more into it. And I've obviously like tried to do this before because like I really like the book. But after learning about this in class, I was going back to like read some sections of it that seemed like just sort of generic, like there wasn't anything that interesting happening. And when I was trying to think about being in the being mode of existence as much as I could and trying to like feel what Sylvia Plath might have been feeling and like have a sort of conversation with the author, I was actually getting something that was a lot deeper and like sort of understanding what she might have been going through while she was writing this. I mean, as much as one could. I've never met her, obviously. Um, but like sort of focusing on what we learned in class while I was doing this thing that I really enjoy, reading Sylvia Plath books, sort of made me get a better understanding of her. And then with that, I feel like when you're trying to understand like the deeper meanings behind things in a book, you start to try and understand the deeper meanings in like life generally, I guess. And I was seeing like how the deeper parts of the book were like reacted to by me, I guess, if that makes sense. Like how I felt about them and how like I was sort of learning about myself as I was reading the book. And I know that that sounds dumb, but like that was a main part of like the reading part of the having and being in daily experience, and how it was talking about not only are you learning about the author, but like hopefully you're learning more about yourself. And I really actually noticed that when I was trying to be in the being mode of existence as much as I could. I mean, I know that we're in the having mode like a lot because that's just sort of how our society is. But when I tried to really focus on it, I was very interested in like what it did to like my reading and my comprehension of the book and Sylvia Plath. And then if you compare that to like reading something that's not particularly thought provoking, like I don't know, like in the seventh grade reading like Twilight or something like that. I mean, me personally, I don't think Twilight is a particularly deep book. I don't think that many people do. And so when you're reading a book like that, or just any book that's just sort of a book that's just meant to entertain you, not to make you think at all. You're just sort of like reading it for the plot, and I like can notice the difference between when I'm reading books like Sylvia Plath, where it's thought provoking, and books like, I don't know, Twilight or something like that, where you're just like reading it for the plot, and it's not like you've learned anything about the author or about yourself. I mean, I personally didn't learn anything about myself reading Twilight when I was younger. Um, and so just like seeing the contrast between these two was really interesting. And I feel like if I hadn't been in Fromm class and I hadn't been able to read the having and being in daily experience, I wouldn't have really like understood that there's a major difference. And I feel like going forward now, I can try and with like the books I'm reading in the future to be in the being mode of existence and try and understand what the author is really saying and really feeling and sort of have like this sort of like mental conversation with the author rather than just reading the generic plot lines and understanding just at the very surface level what the book is saying. Um, I'm really glad that I learned that because I think it'll make reading a lot more interesting. So that's one major thing that I've learned in class this semester that I really enjoyed.